Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Iván Duque, former president of the Republic of Colombia from 2018 to 2022. In 2018, he was the youngest elected president in Colombia's history at the age of 41. He's currently a distinguished fellow at several world-renowned institutions and is a global expert in security affairs, sustainability, conservation, green finance, and energy transition. During his presidency, he launched a direct assault against drug trafficking and organized crime, resulting in the highest number of arrests of high and mid-level criminals and the dismantling of illegal organizations. Please welcome President Iván Duque.
Thank you so much. Good evening. It's a great honor for me to be here tonight. I want to thank Admiral Buck, Joanne. I want to thank Ambassador Buchan, Ambassador Papaduc. I want to salute Michelle Guida and Colonel McDonald. It is a great honor for me to say hello to all the midshipmen, and it's a great honor for me to be here with you tonight, dear brigade. I have been invited tonight to talk about leadership in times of crisis. And I have to begin by saying that my intention tonight is not to lecture, but instead to speak from the heart, from my own experience, and to try to reflect on the same matters that I believe you are reflecting every day as persons who have made a decision in life to serve others, to leave families far away, to dedicate a full life of permanent deployment, permanent responsibilities, and with the happiest joy, which is to serve your nation and to serve the world. And let me begin by sharing you this image. Leadership, it's about creating collective effect. It's about making others believe and trust that things can be different, that things can be changed, that things can be improved, but also motivating others to give the best out of themselves. Leadership is also about making a difference, about choosing principles and values and behaviors and habits that can inspire others to make a difference in the way we deal with circumstances. And leadership has this permanent question that was asked by William Shakespeare at some time: to be or not to be? Are we leaders or not? Are we leaders and followers? There's no leadership without followers, but it's also the kind of followers that can model a better kind of leadership. And I am certain that each one of you has that engine in your soul about leading. Because once you graduate and you get your first responsibilities leading others who are going to put their lives in your hands, you are going to be able to connect. And maybe you'll discover things in yourselves that you have not discovered yet. Or you will discover new things every day. So leaders, they might be born, but they're shaped. And they're shaped by our circumstances and by how we make the best out of us on every single experience in life. But leadership today It's also about facing the worst enemies that we have seen to democracies, to facing the worst enemies we have seen to institutions in many years. And those are the 3 P's that have been very well described by an academic that I admire called Moises Naim when he talks about the 3 P's. He talks about populism, post-truth or fake news, and polarization. Those are enemies that are harming every day our societies. Populism, because they want to take the easy road of generating anger, of telling people that there's always an easy victory, and that richness and equality can be signed by decree. The populists are the ones who are selling hot bread today, but they are creating hunger for the future. And the whole world today has been affected by this behavior. We're seeing a populist that is ruling Russia, that is a war criminal that has triggered a genocide against the Ukrainian people. We have seen populists in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and many other places. But we also see populism in our own democracies with those who believe that the ascent of power is by working on the premise that perception is reality. And that's why they want to change the facts and make everything about fake, about creating the wrong perceptions, no matter if the facts tell you things are different. And those who embrace those behaviors are the ones that can trigger a massive, brutal reaction of violence, brother against brother. And the institutions are challenged, because what happened in nowadays of digitalization, the lies move at the speed of light, while the truth moves in a mule. And we just cannot be observers of that destruction. Because what happens with populism and post-truth is that they want to polarize. They want to divide. They want to break the founding principles of the strongest democracies, because that's the way how they want to win in international relations or in local politics. And those sentiments of division are also seen inside our own families. So leadership in times of crisis has to be true leadership to face those kinds of enemies. And as I have said, let's not be believers that these debates are crafted between the right and the left. It's about right and wrong, not right and left. And it's about the demagogues versus the pedagogues. The demagogues sell the easy solutions. The pedagogues are the ones who take the time to motivate in society the only simple idea that you cannot earn things without sacrifice, without hard work, without giving something. The pedagogues are the ones who take the heat of unpopularity, because they're not just looking for the next election. They're looking for the longer term. And in the decisions that you have made in order to be servants of society and democracy, without considering the political affiliation of anyone, but knowing what's right and what's wrong, It's a way in which you can also shape the world. And that also takes me to the idea of the lessons that I want to share with you tonight. These lessons are not a list of to-do things. This is not a documented philosophy. It's my own personal reflection that I made especially for this lecture. Because I thought to myself, where was I when I was 22? At the age of many of you. Where was I at the moment where I was approaching my graduation? And I was thinking about the future based on the decisions I made. And I was touched today because I met Midshipman Villamil. Francisco Villamil, who is one of you, talked to me some minutes ago. And he told me his story as a Colombian American. And he told me about the day he dreamed of being in the U.S. Naval Academy and the day he dreamed to become an officer and have an impact in society and lead others and be prepared for the worst, but always thinking about the better. Because that's a decision you make when you decide to become a man or a woman in uniform. Tonight, I have decided to show you this following video. It's the first time I project it. It is a family treasure that I believe is worth sharing with you. That skinny little kid on the far left, it's me. Things have changed over time, you can say. But what is interesting is that I was asked the following question.
¿Sí te gustaría ser algún día ministro? Pues no, a mí me gustaría ser ministro, pero después de ministro quisiera seguir dedicándome a la política, pero dedicándome a la política, lanzándome a la presidencia. Eso es lo que yo quisiera ser, porque la presidencia es algo que podría ayudar mucho al país, porque Colombia está en serios problemas y necesita un presidente que ayude mucho a Colombia.
So that was me when I was 7. And this is that young kid, the day of the presidential inauguration. So the first reflection I want to make tonight is about that dream. That was the dream of a 7-year-old. Maybe dreams can turn into ambitions. But there's some point in which the dreams become motivation. And the happiest moment is when you get your dreams to become your vocation. And I am certain that you are here because of that. Because you have been dreaming about your graduation, your years of study in the academy, and you're dreaming about the time you're going to serve. And you're going to serve in a complicated world. And you're going to lead in a complicated world. And my favorite word for anyone who wants to lead is resilience. Maybe the best definition of resilience is to be able to turn every adversity into the most valuable opportunity. That day when I had my oath of office, I was thinking of all the things that I wanted to accomplish in economic transformation, in allowing the poorest of the poor in my country to get real opportunities in their lives, to close the social divides, But there are moments in life where things happen that you never thought they could happen. And how can you face those circumstances is based on this simple phrase. If you want to lead in today's world, it's about the we. It's not about the me. It's about putting your ego aside. Ego is the worst enemy of leadership. Ego blinds you. Ego makes you driven by power and not by principles. And the way that you work with a team, it's essential. How you listen to your teammates, their experiences, how you gather information from debates that are enriched from different points of views. And I quote this great phrase of Thomas Jefferson where he said, when too much people think alike, there's not too much thinking going on. We need to be able to listen to sound debates about positions. And leadership is about, after listening, and even in heavy, heated debates, be able to look for the first options, the best options. That's a true way of leadership in times of crisis. Winston Churchill was asked one day by a student, if I were to become a leader, what should I do? And Winston Churchill said, study history, and study history. Well, tonight I want to say that you can study history, but you have to be prepared to the unexpected. And this is a lesson I got. I never thought, ever, that I would have to deal with a pandemic. But sometimes things happen for a reason. I have a passion for history. I love to read history. And it happened that in 2011, a friend of mine was reading a book called The Great Influenza about the Spanish flu. And I started reading that book in 2011, and I enjoyed it. But it made me obsessed with pandemics. And I became a collector of books about pandemics. And I remember that one day I was in an airplane traveling to Bogota, and I was reading this book about pandemics, and the lady right next to me, she said, "Are you a doctor?" I said, "No, why? Why are you reading that boring book?" And I said, "Because I have a passion to try to understand things that I don't regularly think about." And imagine that in 2018, I had a call by a former president saying that he was going to bring a group of former heads of state to Cartagena to have a meeting with me. And we organized that meeting by the month of February 2019. And in that meeting, there was a former director of the World Health Organization who shared with me the conversation about pandemics and about diseases. And she said, "I would like to invite you to work with us in a group that is making a study called A World in Crisis, and we want to have heads of state discussing about the scenarios of how would we deal with that pandemic if that scenario occurred." And we were supposed to have that meeting in September 2020. And I said, well, I'll be interested in doing that. And I read the report, and the chapter 3 of the report had this scenario of a world pandemic triggered by a respiratory virus. December 2019, I was at the presidential house in Cartagena. My family was celebrating the New Year's Eve. I was with them, but I always go to bed early those days. And I came to the room, turned the news, and there was this headline about a virus in Wuhan. So I started calling the Minister of Health, 1st of January, which is not a good day of the president calling you early in the morning. And I said, we have to understand what's going on. And I said, let's start searching to see how bad this is going to look. As the days passed, we created a plan based on 3 pillars: preparation, contention, and response. I was talking about this all day long, and nobody thought about the scenario that could happen. Well, in fact, it did. It did. And I had to take the most complicated decision ever by a Colombian president to decree a national restriction of mobility and isolation to contain the virus. Because in a developing country, if a virus of this magnitude comes massively, you will have all your health system collapsed. You will lose thousands and thousands of people within days. And I remember that the first scenarios that we started discussing with the National Health Institute told us that if we didn't do anything in the first 60 days, we would lose almost 500,000 people. So we made this decision with this premise. It is not the president who is the scientist. 2 decisions took place that night. We are going to respond based on science and evidence, and not politics and partisanship. Because if you make decisions about people's lives based on partisanship and politics, you're putting people's lives in danger. So we call this community of scientists that you can see in this picture. We made all the evaluations, and we made that decision that night. And that decision was the toughest experience of my life, because it was apparently changing everything I had thought about my administration and about what we were going to accomplish. But that night, I realized that we had to turn this difficulty, the major difficulty, into an opportunity. I learned from history that Franklin Roosevelt used to speak to the American people during the Second World War via radio. That Winston Churchill did the same. That in times of difficulties, the leaders had to approach the people in order to face the fake news and the polarization or the populism. And we created a national TV program every day for more than a year, where we were there with the doctors and the experts, telling the people how we were facing such a crisis. My wife, you can see there in her pink navy cap, decided to be in my hand, and I don't have words to express that gratitude for life, because she created a program to deliver more than 2 million grocery packages to the Colombian families, and without any vaccination, she also went out, and that's leadership. When there's uncertainty, you have to give certainty. Even when you know that there are things that are not controllable, but people want to feel that you as a leader and your family are hand in hand, having people's sentiments as your priority. And we had to face fake news. This is a great example of a fake news. This is the cover of a magazine in Colombia, and this guy used to be called an expert. Without any foundation, you know what it says there? That the vaccination in Colombia is going to start in 2023. And that was published in 2020. Imagine how difficult it was to make decisions with that kind of fake news. Well, what happened was that we started working together as a team with partners, with the United States, with European countries, with Asian countries, and we decided to start mobilizing as much vaccine purchases as we could. We decided to start vaccinating early February 2020. This was the first woman vaccinated who's a nurse in the city of Sincelejo. She was vaccinated, and she was a symbol. And I said, as president, I'm not going to get vaccinated until my age comes in the ranks where I have to make the line. And I only received my shot after 14 million Colombians had been vaccinated. And we were able to work together as a team. And you know what makes me proud? That as a nation, working with the private sector, with the public sector, with the nurses, with the doctors, at all levels, by August 2022, Colombia was ranked #1 country in Latin America in pandemic resilience, and the second in the Western Hemisphere after Canada. And it happened because as teams, we made bold decisions facing times of crisis based on science and with the passion of serving the people. That is the message that I want to share with you tonight. The other element that is very important to share is that when you're leading in time of crisis, it's not about the polls. It's about all. And that means that you have to take the unpopular way. As we were facing the aftermath of the first stage of the pandemic, and we were badly hit fiscally, we had to present fiscal reforms. We had to increase collections. And we went to Congress. Post-truth came out. Many of those who are professional haters wanted people to hate more, to react brutally. And they did create a lot of damage. They basically said that we were hurting the middle class and the poorest families, and we were explaining and over-explaining day by day how to face this circumstance. So we had to withdraw one of the reforms that we presented. And I remember the members of Congress that came to see me, and they said, you know what, Mr. President, let's keep that for the future. Don't waste your political capital on that. It's too costly. And I said, I don't want to be the most popular guy in the cemetery when my sons and grandsons think about what I did. If I have to be the most unpopular president, so be it. But I'm not going to put my country in a difficult position knowing that there's going to be times of inflation and high debt. So we do it now. And you know what made us very proud? That the decisions that we made as a team allowed Colombia to reach in 2021 the highest economic growth in our history, more than 10%. And in 2022, the economy grew above 8%. Why? Because we wanted the private sector to be the engine of that transformation, and we focused our decisions on them. But we also had to figure out how to deal with peacemaking. I was an opposer of the original peace agreement between the Colombian government and FARC. I went to a plebiscite and I defended the no vote, and we won. But even though we won, that result was not reflected on the way that democracy responded. When we assumed office, almost 20 months of the implementation had taken place. And there were people who genuinely were making the process to enter legality. People who were badly influenced in the past, who were recruited as childs, who needed a response, for God's sake. And we decided to continue that process. And I remember that most of the pundits used to say, Duque is not committed to peace. Duque is going to destroy the peace building. And we had to deal with that post-truth. And even today as we speak, I heard someone saying that we destroyed peace. Well, this picture can tell you, when you have the Secretary General of the UN, the major leader of FARC, and the President, myself, in a space where the Secretary General of the United Nations says Colombia is a reference model of peace implementation, you can see how reality and facts can definitely kick the butt of falsehood. And this is the great example when we received the international support, including the United States, on the way that we were implementing, but making the reforms that were needed, one that included that anybody who is in narco-trafficking or is in kidnapping will never be eligible for amnesty in Colombia's history. So you have to make those decisions, knowing that sometimes your courage is going to put you even against people from your base, from your party, from your coalition. But you have to think of all, not the poll. When you have leaders that concentrate on the polls and not on all, that's where you get division in our society. And maybe a best way to say it is do what's right, not what's popular. Today, I think about this picture. These are Venezuelan migrants, midshipmen. These are people who have crossed the Colombian border with frozen bones, lacking hope, with no health attention. Families that have decided to cross to our country because they lost it all, and they require a new beginning. Almost 2 million Venezuelans in Colombia, by the time we assumed office, had passed the border, and they were not visible. They couldn't open a bank account. They couldn't have a formal job. They couldn't buy a house. They couldn't enter the social security system. And we are not a rich country, but we have to think about history. And Colombia and Venezuela share the first constitution of 1821, and Colombia and Venezuela also share that we were born together as nations, that Bolívar was born in Venezuela, that Miranda, who brought us the flag, yellow, blue, and red, came also from Venezuela, and that those brilliant men who crossed the Páramo de Pisba to give us our liberty in the Battle of Boyacá came from Venezuela, a great part of them. That even in times of crisis in Colombia, in the 20th century, they crossed the border to Venezuela. And that same flag, yellow, blue, and red, was the connection. Well, now they required from us bold action. We called our partners. I got a strong support from the United States, from Spain, from the European Union, trying to think how in times of crisis we should deal with migration. In the 14 years that I lived in the United States, I saw how the United States had implemented a temporary protection status from people from Central America that had been badly affected by Hurricane Mitch, or how the U.S. had granted for Haitian citizens a temporary protection status, and it kept in my mind as a reference model. And I tried to persuade other leaders in Latin America, let's do a TPS where we all can have a certain level of quotas to help all these million migrants in the toughest migration crisis ever in this hemisphere. And since nobody at that time, in the aftermath of this first stage of the pandemic, was doing it, I had this meeting with my team, my chief of staff, my director of the presidency who was here, Victor Muñoz, with the ministers, director of migration, the director of borders. And we had a lot of people sending messages from the political world saying, do not grant the TPS. That will make you lose all your popularity. It will affect you. It will put you in a very difficult situation. Again, popularity aside. And I remember I called the Vatican representative, that you can see him there, and I said, we're going to grant a TPS for 2 million Venezuelan migrants, Excellency, and I need your support. And he said, God bless you. And I said, no, I mean, thank you for the blessing, but that's not what I'm asking. I said, Colombia is a country of faith and majoritarily is Catholic. I just want Pope Francis to give a message to the Colombian people, thanking them for this gesture. Because Colombia is putting together what has been said in Fratelli Tutti, his last encyclical. And he said, well, let me see what he thinks. Never got back to me in the following days because I know the schedules were complicated. But that Sunday after that decision was made, Pope Francis came to the St. Peter's Plaza. And he said that he thanked the Colombian people. And we started a process. We said that we wanted to give 1.7 million TPS cards with facial recognition in less than a year. USAID said, we're going to be there with you guys. And you know what happened? This was the first TPS card that was given to a Venezuelan citizen. And before August the 7th, 2022, 1.7 million TPS cards had been given to Venezuelan citizens in Colombia, demonstrating that you don't have to be a rich country in order to have a fraternal migration policy. That is also leadership in times of crisis. And I cannot be here without expressing my gratitude to the United States of America because of many things, but this image. This image means a lot. I was telling Admiral Buck that when I saw the Comfort entering Colombian waters, seeing so many men and women in uniform attending migrants was something that touched me, Jordan. That was a moment where I recall the importance of partnerships and allies in times of crisis. But I also want to live for your consideration this other concept. Even in your worst crisis, think in bold endeavors and lead with attention on details. Many people thought that the pandemic was going to make us lose all our priorities. And this is an image of the Leticia Pact, where we were able to call all the Amazonic countries to put together the Leticia Pact to protect the Amazon. You had presidents from the left, from the right, from the center, from everywhere, with the idea of protecting nature. We made something very important for Colombia as a team, which was not to leave behind the strategic infrastructure projects. And I remember that my grandmother, Stella Tono, before she passed away, she said one day, son, I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see the La Línea tunnel being finished. This has been a project that was there for 100 years of planning, discussions, and when I assumed office, it was 42% advanced in 12 years of construction. And I remember that during the campaign, I said in one of my stump speeches in a rally that I was going to finish the tunnel of La Línea with my team. And a lady came and grabbed my arm and she said, you know, son, don't say that. All the campaigners that come here say that. And we were in the middle of a pandemic, mid-year 2020. We had been working closely. I remember I called the director of road systems every morning at 6 a.m. How are we doing with the tunnel? How are we doing with the tunnel? And finally, in mid-2020, the tunnel of La Línea, the largest tunnel in Latin America, the longest tunnel in Latin America, 9 kilometers, was inaugurated. And that was a very important message for our people, as it was also this inauguration of the crossing of the Central Mountain Corridor of Colombia. 33 kilometers 31 bridges, 25 tunnels, and the shortening of almost 2 hours of drive for most of the truck drivers, improving Colombians' competitiveness. We also decided to accelerate the construction of the 4th-generation highways. And we were able, in the midst of a pandemic, to deliver more than 3,000 new kilometers of roads in Colombia. And we call other presidents in the international spectrum to expand the protected areas. And in Glasgow, in COP26, we announced with Panama, with Ecuador, and Costa Rica, the creation of the largest maritime protected area in the world, that is called the Friendship Protected Area, the Sisterhood Protected Area. So even in times of crisis, you can also make important transformations, as we also did when we expanded the non-conventional renewable energies in Colombia, passing from 0.2% to almost 14%. And this is what you see in this map. The white part of the screen is what I received in 2018, 0.2%. And we called the private sector in times of crisis with the right regulation. And we inaugurated the largest wind farm in Colombia, in La Guajira. And we inaugurated more than 20 solar farms around the country. So even in times of crisis, you can demonstrate that you can keep being bold and making those transformations, as I also was able to fulfill something that was an achievement that I dedicated to many students in Colombia. Having the possibility for all the emerging middle class of Colombia and the poorest of the poor students to go to public education at university level or technical and technician level for free. And almost more than 2 million people will have been beneficiaries of this decision. So a crisis cannot stop you from your ideals, as it didn't stop us to granting subsidies for poor families to access the buying of a home and being able to have almost a new 1 million new homes around the country. Those are lessons. But another lesson that I want to share with you tonight is about being commander-in-chief. Nobody is prepared for that, because a commander-in-chief is more than just the president giving orders. It's being connected to your forces. It's knowing each specialty. It's touching hearts, touching minds, building friendships, and dealing with circumstances that are also unexpected. For the first time in Colombia's history, we faced a hurricane category 5. That is what Katrina looked like in an island where only 6,000 people live, called Providence, that had never seen a hurricane of this magnitude. We lost communications. And all I was thinking was about Katrina, because I lived in the United States during those years, and I thought a hurricane category 5 in Providence just destructed it all. So we had to start moving, and moving fast. I called the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the police, everybody, to start sending ships with aid from Cartagena as soon as we know that a hurricane of this magnitude had hit the land. I asked one of the pilots of the Air Force to fly over Providence in a military plane. And this is what Providence looked like. And all I was thinking was about people that could have died. I thought thousands of people had died. So we were in the presidential plane before I took the previous flight, the other flight that I mentioned. And we said we have to mobilize like no other time all our forces. And it is the Navy who's going to take the lead. And I can tell you, Navy was prepared for everything, but not for a hurricane category 5 of that magnitude. But we had to mobilize as much people and as much experience as possible. I remember that we landed in Providence, and I said, I want to be the first person out of the plane. So I jumped out of the plane. Colonel Gomez, who was the head of my security, who's here with us tonight, and Colonel Torres were chasing me. Mr. President, I said, no, guys, let's go and serve the people. There's no time here to think about security detail. Let's talk with the people. And I remember there was a guy coming with a small motorcycle, and I stopped the guy and I said, man, lend me your motorcycle. And the guy looked at me and I said, you know, I'm not going to steal it, you know, I'm going to. So in a moment of tension, he kind of laughed and he said, can I go with you? And I said, let's go. And we started walking around. We started in the motorcycle getting around the neighborhoods. And there was this guy called Crispin who lost everything. He came out crying and he hugged me and he said, Mr. President, we're all alive. And I said, what do you mean? Mr. President, I think we only lost one person. We are alive. And that's what matters. So we put together a reconstruction work where the first stage was to remove all the rubbles. And we had more than 6,000 persons in uniform, men and women, led by the Navy. It was the first time in Providence people saw the Army or the Air Force or such a great amount of policemen, but also they never seen such a size of presence of the Navy and how the Navy was commanding all this exercise with Admiral Pettis, who was the commander of the Navy. And this is how Providence looked like. I remember that I said that the first stage would take 100 days, and people used to say, yeah, Duque said he's going to rebuild everything in 100 days. No, we said in 100 days we will get everything started after we removed all the rubbles. We called the private sector, we called the construction companies, we called for a big team. And this happened during the pandemic. We were talking directly to all the men in uniform and thanking for their service, expressing our gratitude. There was no vaccination at the time, and we needed to get things started. And midshipmen, 2 years after, this is how Providencia looks like. It is one of the most beautiful exercises of teamwork I've ever seen in my life. And I have to thank all the men and women in uniform who made this possible with the communities. Because you have to be prepared, and you will face situations like this. Hopefully not, but you might. In the US or in an allied country where you will be deployed. And that community connection and that community service makes a difference for life. And leadership in those circumstances is not just about giving orders, it's also getting to understand the suffering of those who don't have patience because they lost it all. But with a good team, things can work out. And another lesson for tonight, midshipmen brigade, it's about calm and strength. I believe in balances in life. Calm, be able to understand the circumstances, and strength, which is to deal with complex issues and the suffering of others. First 4 months of my administration, the terrorist group ELN put out a car bomb in a police academy. An academy like this one, where 22 young persons like you that devoted their life to service were brutally killed. And I remember that in the mass, Diego Molina's mother, who's one of these 22 angels, came to me and hugged me, and she gave me his uniform that I still have with me. And she said, Mr. President, please make justice. A lot of people like to talk about peace, and ELN loves to talk about peace, and they just use peace as a propaganda instrument. Because during the 17 months of conversations they had with my predecessor government, they killed 100 people, they perpetrated 400 terrorist attacks, and they kidnapped almost 1,000 people. So we said, no more talking. And one of the plotters of this event was a terrorist under the nickname of Uriel, who was a social media star because he loved to talk about all his plotting in social media. And with Colombian Navy intelligence and their work with all their agencies, we said we have to give a message to the families. And I remember that I got a lot of people saying, you know, you're not doing enough, you're not going to get to the kingpins of ELN. But again, it's not me, it's we. And this is how the Academy looked like, but the perseverance, the calm and the strength of our people allowed us to say that that kingpin died in a military operation done with calm and strength. Because there's nothing that will ever stop the calm and strength of those who are working with the principles of law and order. It was a major military achievement. But we also had to face other criminals. The most dangerous drug lord since Pablo Escobar, called Otoniel, who raped 14-year-old girls in every place he went, who killed more than 300 men in uniform, who used to carry thousands of dollars to bribe people as he moved around the country, and he was tried to be imprisoned many times. We changed the strategy with the police, with the Navy, with the Army, with the Air Force. Nobody thought we were going to get that guy. 10 years of searching, and he was captured. And not only he was captured, he was put in prison. And he feared extradition, and today he's extradited in a prison in the United States of America because you have to work with law and order. So, my fellow midshipmen, brigade, these are our experiences that I want to share. But there's something more important than all this, and it's that your principles are not negotiable. Principles cannot be negotiated. Fairness, justice, law and order are not negotiable. And one of those moments happened in 2021 when I was at the United Nations. Before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, I gave to deliver a report on the implementation of the peace process. And the Russian ambassador sent me a very nasty message in his speech, and he thought I was going to be diplomatic, which I wasn't, because I don't allow, because diplomacy without principle is hypocrisy. And if someone wants to hurt your principles, you go back and you defend what you believe. And this was said during those days.
My position is clear. What's happening in Ukraine is simply insane. This is a brutal attack on the sovereignty of a country. This is a genocide. You know, looking at the bombing of maternity hospitals, the massacre in Bucha, and many other sad events like that, just require that the voice of all the international community must be raised to condemn this issue. And we all must isolate that conduct and give all the necessary support to the Ukrainian people to liberate themselves from this brutal attack. That's my position. Thank you so much.
Principles are non-negotiable. And remember that diplomacy without principle is hypocrisy. In the world stage, you have to call things by their name. And your responsibility when you graduate, when you start that ascent process in your career, where you have to talk to power, you always talk the truth to power. Because that's your role. With strategy, with solutions, with ideas, with proposals, but always speak the truth to power. I had to face one of the most complicated times of social turmoil. And it was politically instrumentalized by radicals who wanted to blockade the whole country. And I knew that after the pandemic, there were people that genuinely were protesting because they were affected. I knew that there were people from the unions that also had expectations. But there was clear the intention of politically driven groups to blockade the country, to make the economy collapse, and to affect democracy. That was non-negotiable. And we clearly said, we will not accept blockades as an instrument of negotiation. I remember that I got pressure from different sides of political spectrum, but I even got calls from members of Capitol here who genuinely were worried about what's going on in Colombia, and they said, well, Mr. President, why don't you find maybe a corridor? And I said, well, you will not accept a corridor in 395. How would I accept a corridor? Because it's illegal. So principles cannot be negotiated. You can have calm, you can have the strength, you can find the solutions, but you cannot put democracy or institutions in jeopardy. And leadership in time of crisis is about decision making. They're not perfect solutions. There's not the wise man or woman who's going to come and say, I have the best solution for this and that. Easy decisions are always there for easy circumstances. But sometimes in times of crisis, when a problem knocks at your door, the solution is not between good or bad. It can be about bad or worse. And you have to be prepared for that. And my final message tonight is that I didn't come here today to talk as a lecturer. I came here because I admire you all. I came here with passion, with admiration, and humbleness to share my personal experiences and try to leave something in your conscience, in your hearts, and as a reflection. The world that you're living today is going to change much differently in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, the next decade. We might see conflicts in other places in the world. We might see what we have never seen in cyber attacks. We might see new forms of pandemics. We might see new forms of natural disasters driven by climate change. We will see those who want to keep on promoting hate for their ascent to power. We will see multiple circumstances. But one message for all of you is that a leader in any position of power, political, military, private sector, NGO, you name it, has to be a leader that is not thinking on the next election, but on the next generation. And I want you to keep that in mind. And as a final note, these are the Colombian members of our Navy, men and women in uniform that have been inspired by many of those regarded students of Annapolis Naval Academy, those who have been your allies and will be your allies, those who have carried our uniform with dignity and love as you're carrying yours. Coming to the Annapolis U.S. Naval Academy is one of the highest honors I've ever had, and I want to dedicate this lecture to all the men and women in uniform from both our navies that have worked together jointly. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Brigade, we have time for just 2 questions, so make your way to the mic if you want to take a couple of questions for President Duque.
You liked it?
A couple questions. Yes, sir. It was great. Fantastic. Top right.
Before anything, I want to say that I told Admiral Buck that I know the Navy is all about discipline, but I said that I'm so happy tonight that I'm willing to respond as many questions as you have. So I feel very happy to be here tonight.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Midshipman First Class Al-Qadi from 16th Company. Thank you for sharing these great lessons with us tonight. I'm positive that a lot of us would benefit from them in our future careers. I'd like to be greedy and ask for one more. Was there ever a time where you or your team have made a decision where in the future it turned out to be wrong or it didn't deliver the wanted outcome? And if so, what did you do in this situation and how did you handle the extreme pressure at that high stage of leadership?
That's a great question, and if you want me to respond in detail, let me just begin with one circumstance that is very well narrated in one of the best books about the French Revolution. And it was a book called Citoyens or Citizens by Simon Schama. And he recalls at the beginning of the book that when President Nixon visited the People's Republic of China, he had this conversation with Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai, who was one of the ideological leaders of the People's Republic of China in 1973. And he asked him what he thought about the French Revolution. And he said, it's too soon to tell. So why I mention this is because it's a constant reflection. Every day, I have some time to reflect about decisions we made, maybe things that we should have done faster, maybe things that we should have done earlier. And I will tell you about the things that I might regret. I, for example, regret that I spent some time presenting before Congress some amendments to the legislation about the transitional justice in Colombia. It was 159 articles, and we proposed amendments to 6 articles. And we were attacked as if we were destroying it all. And I think if we would have approved those 6 amendments, it would have been the largest consensus ever built on peace implementation in Colombia. And it didn't happen. But maybe being judgmental with myself, maybe I didn't spend too much time trying to persuade the opposition about those 6 amendments. And that's something I regret, because I think we would have made a big consensus, a bigger consensus. So that's an example. Another thing that I regret is not accelerating other things beforehand. We were able to leave 34% of the Colombian territory declared a protected area. But I think we could have done things much faster or earlier. We could have, for example, in social policy, being able to accelerate the deployment of conditional and unconditional cash transfers to the poorest of the poor in an earlier way. There are things that are always in those kinds of reflections. But decisions have already been made, and they are to be judged by history. And there are decisions that you'll never know how they're going to behave years after. I give you one example. I believe that when Germany decided to sign agreements with Russia in the provision of natural gas, I don't think they ever thought that was going to be a very compromising national security decision. I think they thought about constructivism in international relations. But they didn't work out. Why? Because you cannot trust a criminal like Vladimir Putin. So those are the kinds of circumstances that are always been reflected. And I think this country is one of the countries that has better documented in history and the presidential decision making, short term, long term. I think there were a lot of strategical decisions we made that are going to be very important in the future. All our work with NATO, all the way that we decided to increase the collaboration in multiple ways with allies, the way that we open trade with other countries, those decisions will maybe see their blooming moments in the future. But as I say, you have to be humble and you have to be reflective on a permanent basis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Señor Presidente, I have a question for you. What is something you wish most Americans understood about their perception of foreign people, such as Colombians and people from other nations?
Well, Francisco, I have to say that I feel so proud about you, man. I mean, I saw when you talked to me some minutes ago, and you told me your family history and the passion that you have for serving the United States Navy. I feel very proud to see many families here that are the families of migrants, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, African Americans. You see all this beautiful composition of heritage. And I think one of the things that have made the United States stronger in its history is the openness for migration. And I saw how one of the students of this academy, the graduates of this academy, Senator Jhon McCain, fought so hard to be able to build that comprehensive migration bill that is bipartisan, bicameral. And I think that is a challenge. But I can certainly believe that one of the strengths of the American democracy is that this has been a land of freedom and a land of inspiration for many families who came here with nothing, and they build their education, their wealth, their opportunities based on sacrifice and hard work. So I don't want to be neither judgmental nor lecturing US policy, but I will always tell the people, look at your major strengths. Today, the United States of America is the second country in the world with the largest Spanish-speaking population after Mexico. Today. And it's just an example. But today there are also people from different parts of the world that are living under dictatorships and brutal regimes, wanting to come here to experience liberty, contribute, as many families did in the Second World War and the aftermath. So I believe one of the strengths of this country is that openness to migration. Don't lose it, because I think you have made a reference model that inspired decisions like the ones we did with the Venezuelan citizens. Thank you, Francisco.
Yeah.
President Duque wants one more question, so we'll take one final question. Right up there.
Good evening, sir. Midshipman First Class Alexei Andreevich Lakay. Hey, plebe year's not that bad. Midshipman First Class Alexei Andreevich Lakay from 14th Company. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question is, given the extent of Russian propaganda and the availability of international news and media, where do we draw the line between blaming the authoritarian regime in Russia for the actions in Ukraine versus holding the civilians of Russia accountable for not only inaction, but promotion of the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
So let me say this, and I have to elaborate on an idea that I also want to share with you tonight. And it's about democracy. I think democracy is like health. When you have it, you take it for granted. When you're losing it, you want to desperately bring it back. And I don't think we can take democracy for granted, neither in the United States nor anywhere in the world. And I think democracy, it's a verb more than a noun, because it's a working process. It's a work in progress. And what happens is that a lot of leaders in the world like to talk about democracy, but it is democracy for them to ascend to power, and then they mutate democracy into dictocracy and then into dictatorships. So democracy is not just having elections. Russia has elections, crooked elections, but they have elections. Now, it is the permanent transition and change in power, with a three-division of power, with independent media, with freedom of expression, with freedom of association, with freedom of enterprise, what makes a democracy. And I think the international community has to reflect on those decisions that were done in the past, going to the first question, where bad things happen and people look the other side. We're very worried about the genocide that is taking place in Ukraine right now, but what happened some years ago when Putin decided to invade Crimea? Did the world react the way they reacted right now? No. And things will be much different if the world would have reacted at that time as they are reacting today? Yes. Because you have to stand up to criticize, to finger point the aggressions on democracy. Because those aggressions on democracy are the ones that are creating brutal regimes in the world that end up partnering to harm the stronger democracies in the world, and that are today the sponsors and safe havens of cyber terrorists and many other negative circumstances. So I believe Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. And I have said it with loud voice, as president and as a former president and as a regular citizen. And I believe that what is happening in Ukraine is not a war, it's a genocide. And I believe that what is happening in Ukraine deserves the International Criminal Court not only to issue a warrant or an arrest note, it needs the international community to hopefully make it applicable. And those are the kinds of decisions we face today. Now, are the Russian people responsible for this? Maybe I think differently. I think they are intimidated. I think they have fear. They have been disinformed. They have been polarized. And they have been also victims of populism, of easy solutions and pressure on media and the manipulation of the information that moves on all sorts of networks. But I'm pretty sure that if the Russian people were to choose if Putin shall remain in office, I think they'll kick him out. But they need to have that possibility, and that possibility will only work if the international community really puts the strength that is required for Vladimir Putin to put a stop on this genocide now. And this is risky, yes, but I think it's riskier to let Vladimir Putin keep on playing with the world community and the world security the way he has been playing for the last year and a half. And I don't have a magic solution here, but I think the most important thing to do is that the principles are not negotiable and that you have to make a call to all those countries who are giving support to Vladimir Putin and say, where are you standing? Are you standing in the brutal side of history, or are you standing in defense of democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir, on behalf of the Brigade of Midshipmen, please accept a small token of our appreciation.
I was prepared for this.